She knows already. Brilliant. Hello everyone and welcome back to #A Speech a Week. My name is Pippa, I'm a professional actor. I trained at Bristol Old Vic Theatre School and I work with them on occasion doing bits and bobs, mostly auditions. And I've worked in theatre, film, voiceover and a little bit of telly since graduating from there. And I am very passionate about helping people get Shakespeare and realise that it's not just a posh thing for the elite classes. It is for absolutely everybody. And as an actor, I'm assuming you're an actor if you're watching this, it is a feast for you to enjoy. Shakespeare's work is full of so much drama, conflict, tension, passion, emotion, all the brilliant things that make us human. So this week on A Speech a Week, what we're going to do is look at JACQUES from As You Like It. It is Act 2, Scene 7, and it begins, all the world's a stage. And all the men and women merely players. That bit, essentially. So go find it. I think it's round 142, line 142. And the way this works, if you are new here, and even if you're not, while you go grab a cup of tea, I will read you the speech out loud. I'll lift it off the page for you. I'm not here to show you my acting. I'm here to lift it off the page and give it some colour and some texture and some thought behind it. And then we'll work through it together. If you're watching this back, comment below and let me know any thoughts or feelings as we go. And if you are watching live right now, then you can join in the chat function and I will be sat on live with you to explain anything and join in the conversation as well. Then I'll read it one more time once we've gone through everything and then I'll let you carry on your lovely day. Sound good? Yes, it does. So let's get started then, shall we? This is, in fact, do you know what? I'm not going to talk about the context of this. Generally on A Speech a Week, I might give you a brief overview of what's just happened for the character. But this one is such a standalone speech in the sense that it's just a lovely piece of poetry. And it's not really, I think the thing with JACQUES, and this is a generalization, don't run with this is my opinion, he's a bit of a party pooper. And he's a bit, he is a bit on the outskirts of the community within the Forest of Arden. He doesn't really get fully involved and enjoy himself. He is a melancholy figure throughout the play. And here, I'll just quickly say what Duke Senior says. So Duke Senior is not in charge of the Forest of Arden, but I guess he's the kind of leader of the community there. And he says, "Thou seest we are not all alone unhappy. This wide and universal theatre presents more woeful pageants than the scene wherein we play in." So already he's kind of talking about theatre and the idea that this wide and universal theatre is such a lovely line. Presents more woeful pageants. So a pageant is like, a display. I think of a parade, but look it up. Pageants are different things to different people. More woeful. If something is woeful, it is sad. So it presents more woeful pageants than the scene wherein we play in. So Shakespeare does this quite often. He'll nod to the fact that we're in a play. Midsummer Night's Dream does this as well. But it's he's kind of saying, oh, I see that we're not all alone unhappy. They're going through a bit of a tricky time. It's not easy living when you go live in a forest as an outcast from society. It can be pretty tough. And yeah, Orlando's just arrived, but anyway, we don't need to talk about that. So basically, they're going through a bit of a tricky time, okay? And JACQUES takes what Duke Senior says about this theatre and the woeful pageants wherein the woeful pageants, the more woeful pageants, than the scene wherein we play in. And JACQUES takes that idea and runs with it. So generally, like I said, I would maybe go into a little bit more depth than that, what's just happened. But it's important to remember, if you are doing this monologue, if you're going to use it, personally, I wouldn't use it for a drama school audition. I don't think it's more of a commentary than something really Well, it's up to you. I get it. I just would avoid it. It's a lovely speech, but there's not much going on for your character. He's just... I mean, that's not true. There's obviously loads going on for JACQUES. I feel like I'm digging myself a hole a little bit here. But anyway, he's taking what Duke Senior has said and he's reacting to it. And I think it's really important to remember whenever you're doing a monologue or a scene, something has been said before you start talking, whether or not you've actually got someone reading in for you or whether or not it's a monologue. Remember, your character doesn't know it's a monologue. They're expecting someone to jump in or maybe enjoy it or, you know, although no one interrupts JACQUES, he is speaking amongst all of the people. I was about to call them the merry men. They're absolutely not called the merry men. What does he call them? What does Shakespeare call them? Countryman, goat herd, shepherdess. I feel like he called them something, the other people in the forest. The foresters? I don't know. They're all there. It's not just Duke Senior. It's him and a few other people that are just, you know, sat eating food. So he is kind of performing and talking to them as his audience, but also as the actor having an awareness that the audience are there. And he's making a comment about the fact that we, regardless of being in a theatre, are all playing our parts throughout our lifetime. There we go. I think I got there in the end. Bloody hell. Right, let's read it out loud, shall we? So Duke Senior's said what he's just said that I read. Said what he said when I read, anyway. And JACQUES says the following. My right shoulder's still a bit buggered, so I'll use my left hand to lift it up. Here we go. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. At first, the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms. Then the whining schoolboy, with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like snail unwillingly to school. And then the lover, sighing like furnace, with a woeful ballad made to his mistress' eyebrow. Then a soldier, full of strange oaths and bearded like the pard, jealous in honour, sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation even in the cannon's mouth. And then the justice, in fair round belly, with good capon lined, with eyes severe, and beard of formal cut, full of wise saws and modern instances, and so he plays his part. The 6th age shifts into the lean and slippered pantaloon, with spectacles on nose and pouch on side, his youthful hose well saved, a world too wide for his shrunk shank, and his big manly voice turning again toward childish treble pipes and whistles in his sound. Last scene of all that ends this strange, eventful history is second childishness and mere oblivion. Sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. And I feel like that speech is almost like that whistle I just did. It's a bit of a bummer. Like I say, I think that JACQUES is a party pooper. And he's a kind of... He comes across as this woeful, romantic in a wistful kind of longing, woe is me, I've been screwed over by the world kind of artist or poet in the play. And again, this is all my point of view on the character from what I've read and seen of it. It doesn't really go anywhere, despite the fact that he takes us through a whole life and a lifetime and the 7 parts that we play in our lifetime. I'm just getting my computer ready because I will be using the dictionary function shortly. It still ends in this kind of melancholic state. And I think traditionally when you're around people and they're all a bit glum, I've just realised my oven's on. Hang on a second. Oh dear. It's been on all night. Well, that bit had, I don't think it was on, but good lord. Okay, focus, Pippa. Back to Shakespeare, not on knobs on the kitchen hob. It doesn't go anywhere. Traditionally, if you're around like all your pals and they're all having a bit of a shit time, surely you'd just try and cheer them up with a little story. And I think in a way the speech does go somewhere, because it does kind of start quite jovial and jolly, as life does when you're a youth. You're young, you don't want to go to school, you've got a shining morning face, maybe that's sarcastic. You know, when you're a kid, everything is much easier. Even of this time, you know, a child, you have your childish innocence. Life hasn't really got to you yet, although I can imagine at this time, in context of the time it was written, I can imagine children did have to grow up quite fast, and there was quite a lot of traumatic stuff going on. Children would have died quite a lot as well. Like the mortality rate of youngsters was shockingly high. Remember, medicine, understanding about health and disease wasn't all there. And nourishment wasn't all there as well. So all that put aside, he's talking about the lovely innocence of youth. And it kind of feels like the story, and that it might go somewhere, and he lightens us up a little bit. But then he kind of leads us to my favourite phrase in the speech, mere oblivion. It's so overwhelming, that bit. We're on this planet for a very short time, and when we die, it is mere oblivion. We don't know what's coming after that. He doesn't talk about heaven or hell as well, which I think is a really interesting choice in this speech. But it's important to remember, in the Forest of Arden, there are kind of no rules. There is no stable society. It is more of a community of people living however they can. And I think Shakespeare uses the forest, I've mentioned this before, he uses the forest as a bit of a symbolism, oh my goodness, as a symbol, I suppose a symbol of freedom, of exploration, of discovery. And so I think it's interesting that he rarely does talk about heaven and hell in this play, actually, I think. I'm sure there are some references, but it is normally, he doesn't bring in those dark notions of hell in the way that he does in sonnets sometimes, and in other plays. For Hamlet, for example, I think. In fact, is Hamlet... I'm sure Hamlet talks about heaven and hell a little bit more. The idea of right and wrong. This is much more of this speech as well, I think, is much more of it doesn't have much judgment in it. Like I said, it feels more like a commentary from JACQUES. So, all of that being said, let's work through it, shall we? So he says, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. And I think I didn't really pitch that how I would do it if I had just heard Duke Senior say what he said. So let's just go back. Thou seest we are not all alone unhappy. This wide and universal theatre presents more woeful pageants than the scene wherein we play in. So as well, for me, that's Duke Senior trying to bring everyone together. We might be having a really rough time, everyone, but you know what? This universe is wide, and other people will be going through woeful situations as well. We're not alone in our unhappiness, and let's take comfort in that. And then, JACQUES says, all the world's a stage. It's like he's kind of agreeing with him almost, I would say. Obviously, it depends on how Duke Senior presents that. The actor playing that part decides to say that. But yeah, I perhaps would have said it considering the way it's written as well. I think there could be a pause where I think JACQUES ponders on that and then comes in with it. Yeah, all the world's a stage. Yeah, I don't know. Food for thought, lots could be done. So all the world's a stage. He's saying the world, life, is like a theatre, and we're all actors within that theatre, which is what he goes on to say, and all the men and women merely players. Interesting as well that he includes women at this point. Traditionally, unfortunately, there is the idea, well, I think in the Bible actually as well, hey, like they say, oh, man is this, man does that, man, but actually women are different to men. From an anatomical and biological perspective, right? So usually they would be kind of overlooked when a man is talking about people. He'd probably more likely draw on men. Do you know what I'm saying there? It makes sense in my brain. We'll go with it. But he includes the women. He doesn't just say, and all the men merely players. Why? Shakespeare includes the women. Remember, there would have been women in the theatre, for sure. And also, throughout the context of this play, Rosalind is dressed as a boy to disguise herself and create safe passage as she goes on this journey through the forest and lives here. So I think it is quite relevant to the play that he actually does list or include the women at this point, you know, the two different genders that obviously there's more than that these days in terms of, you know, how we identify as ourselves. However, back in those days, I don't believe they actually had all these extra names and things and had actually given all of that much thought. So I feel like I'm being a bit grey there, but forgive me if I've said anything that does offend anyone. I don't know. We don't know, as far as I'm aware. In fact, if you know of any sources from historians that know a little bit more about gender identity and everything, please comment it below and I can have a little read up about it. But anyway, he goes on to say, and all the men and women merely players. And so a player is a actor. And also play, games, all of that. Think about what comes up for you with these words when you hear them. And know that that's true to you. It's really important for me, I think, it's part of the process to know what that word means to you before you look it up or what you think it could mean. Identifying all of that makes it a lot more personable for you as an actor to understand. And if you've got a natural idea, it's always good to kind of lean into that, but also then inform yourself of the dictionary meaning of said word. So, all the men and women merely players as well. He doesn't say, and all the men and women players. And all the men and women are actors. He says merely. If something is merely, I am going to use my dictionary this time with you a little bit. But I do encourage you to go through. There's things that I'm going to probably not talk about that you might read and go, I don't understand that word, muling. I've never used that word before. Don't skim over that. Look it up. Do the work. Or I will personally find you and give you a little bop on the head. So merely, just, only. It's like, oh, it's not, and we're all the men and women. In fact, where is, oh, here we go. Yes, synonyms. Only, purely, solely, simply, just, but. For me, it's kind of undermining. It's not, you know, it's not that we're the superstars of it. We're just a little bit. We're just actors. And of course, that is a bit of a joke because the guy saying it is an actor, but he's acting as if he's not an actor, making a comment on the fact that we're all just actors. So yeah, I think it's really well written. It's a lovely little bit. We could talk about it all day, but let's move on. And all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. So here we go. Now, this is what I was trying to say. Like, generally, you'd make a generalization, or a man would, and say, and one man in his time. He doesn't say, and one person in their time plays many parts, their acts being 7 ages. He doesn't do that. He is specifying a gender here. So, again, interesting, food for thought. And maybe in a modern play, a modern take of this, you might edit that and change it to a more gender neutral, balanced term. Who bloody well knows? It's up to you. So that's what he's saying. And one man in his time plays many parts. I've missed that bit. They have their exits and their entrances. So traditionally in theatre, you have an entrance and you have an exit. You know, you come on stage, you come off of stage. And he's talking about the world being a stage, again, remember. And one man in his time plays many parts. So again, the idea of playing lots of parts in a theatre show. You aren't just one character throughout. And traditionally in Shakespeare's time, especially in touring theatre, you would have multi-rolled all the time. And I highly recommend that you go see some open-air Shakespeare tours. There's some great ones, there's some shocking ones, I would say. But you'll find most of the actors, you don't just play one part, because you can't afford to pay everyone if there was a whole company playing one part. So repertory theatre and all of that jazz, you would multi-role. And that's what he's saying here. His acts being 7 ages. So traditionally in theatre, again, you have Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. We're in Act 2 at this point. And he identifies 7. And so actually talking about the whole biblical reference, let me just look up. 7 days. Reminds me of that horror film, The Ring. I don't know if any of you have seen it. The original one is a hell of a lot scarier than the Hollywood one, just saying. Let me just type in 7 days Bible. I feel like, the 7 days of creation. And resting on the 7th day, we can imitate God, yada, yada, yada. Okay, cool. So interesting that he picked 7. So although there's no direct saying or imagery of heaven or hell, I do think that's maybe something that JACQUES has maybe plucked out and taken from his knowledge of the Bible, of religion, and how, it took 7 days to build the world, according to Christian beliefs. So maybe that is a little nod to that. He could have said 9 ages or 10 or 3. You're a child, you're a man, you're old. But he doesn't. He goes into a little bit more specificity than that. He does say 7. So there we go. And then we've got his first full stop there. His acts being 7 ages. And then there's a decision to go on and share those 7 ages. He could have stopped talking there, but he doesn't. And what he talks about first is, at first, the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms. So let's just define mule. Mule, M-E-W-L. For me, mewling, it sounds a bit like meowing. Mewling, I think whining, I think. And puking is literally vomiting, I think, but we'll see. Let's look up. I've never actually looked up puking before. That could actually have a completely different meaning. Let's see. I'm so excited. So it says mule here, especially of a baby, cry feebly or querulously. Whimper. Oh, so that's interesting, isn't it? So if mewling, I would have perhaps leaned onto the sounds that word creates in my mouth. Mewling. I'm thinking of a mule as well, like a donkey. Donkeys are kind of like rah, a bit more, making all sorts of really lovely sounds. You're welcome. Louder and more abrupt and boisterous, I would say. However, that's not what mewling, the true meaning of mule, is. It's whimper, cry feebly. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Or of a cat or a bird make a high-pitched crying noise. Mew. Interesting. And it says here actually, a forlorn cat mewled pathetically. So it is a bit of I'd say pathetic kind of whine, cry of a baby. So there we go. So now that's going to inform how I say that word. For example, at first, the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms. Do you see how different that is to how I did it before? So let's also look up puke. Oh, I spelt it wrong. P-U-K-E. Let's have a look. It literally just says vomit. Cough up, bring up, regurgitate, heave, throw up. But interesting, it doesn't say anything else. It is literally a verb, vomit, to puke. But for me anyways, in a modern context, if someone is puking, it sounds more disgusting than vomiting. I would never say the word vomiting unless I was in a bit more of a formal thing. But, you know, if we're like, oh, I was puking up, it's more of a jovial kind of lighthearted way of describing vomiting from my experience anyway. I feel like it was a really popular word when I was at school. Like, oh, I puked up, miss. You know what I mean? I don't know. Anyway, so interesting. So be aware as well that today in our modern context, we might have a bit more of an attitude and use that word in more of a jovial sense and less of a matter-of-fact tone than they would have back in those days. But again, I think it literally just translates to vomit. So it's up to you as the actor when you say this line to put what you want to on that. Maybe you do want to add a bit more of a context to it. Like I did just then, I was like, mewling and puking. I made that a bit more funny because it is a bit more gross. You know, mewling, crying and whimpering is very different to puking. Do you know what I mean? So things to play with. And in the nurse's arms. So there's a lovely sense of being comforted and being held, which I think is a really important part of being human, right? We love to be held. Hugging, literally, we know now, produces happy hormones in our brain. Like having that skin-on-skin contact, that interaction with other people is really, really important. Then the whining schoolboy. So now I've got whining. So whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face. And I don't know if I did the first time I read it, but for me, that image does just make me smile. You know, I think you can't help but smile when you see some kid like just like with his blazer on, not wanting to go to school, or with a big backpack that looks 20 times bigger than him. And so although that's a modern image that I have in my brain, it's similar, I think, to what he's saying here with his satchel. So a satchel, a side pouch bag, and shining morning face. So let's have a quick look up here of shining, actually. So again, we know shining, the sun shines. We know this, but let's see what else it says just so we can be absolutely sure. There's a lot of versions here. So giving out or reflecting bright light, brilliant or excellent at something. But then if someone's walking unwillingly to school, does he have a shining morning face if he doesn't want to go? And who does shine in the morning? Is he a grumpy kid? Is that sarcastic? So there's room to play with that there. I'm just reading some more. Yeah, be bright with emotion. So again, it doesn't necessarily have to be bright with happy emotion. Maybe. I guess it does. Glowing, beaming, radiant, happy. Yeah, okay. And yeah, the opposite, of course, of being shining is dimming, gloomy, darkness. And he's kind of describing that the whining schoolboy, if he's whining, it's not the jovial schoolboy, or it's not the happy-go-Larry schoolboy, is it? It's the whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face. I think that's a bit of a sarcastic comment, personally. Creeping like snail, unwillingly to school. So we've got that lovely simile there. And snails, I don't think really creep. So interesting as well. In fact, let's quickly look up creep. I am looking up quite a lot of words with you today, but I will not do as many moving forward, just so we can get through this. In fact, what time are we on? What time are we on? Oh, lordy lord. Right, so creep. Move slowly and carefully in order to avoid being heard or noticed. Interesting. And actually, here we go. Of a plant, grow along the ground or other surface by means of extending stems or branches. See, isn't that interesting? I didn't know that before, but actually, to me, creep, if someone is a creep, again, I have a different meaning. They're a bit of a pervert, or they are leering, and there's a bit more of a scary horror Nosferatu kind of image in my mind. But actually, from a botanical standpoint, it is about a plant, you know, creeping, leaning on and using the floor, extending out their branches. And so, therefore, again, it makes me think that image maybe isn't what I initially thought. He's reluctantly going, but he's still moving forward like a snail. I think it's interesting. Food for thought. Unwillingly to school. So again, the idea he doesn't want to go to school. It's funny. I like it. Creeping like snail, unwillingly to school. And that's a nice word as well, unwillingly. 4 syllables there. And also, I don't know, sometimes Shakespeare, especially in the sonnets, as my sonneteers will know, likes to play on the idea of will being him, but also your will. What is your will? And will I am. You know, all these things. He loves to play with that. And so maybe that's a bit of a nod and an inside joke for him. I don't know. I'm just going to throw it out there. Maybe Will Shakespeare like trotted off to school and loved it. And therefore it's not very like William Shakespeare to trudge and creep like a snail to school. Again, he might not have put that in there for that, but maybe he did. But again, maybe it's also the opposite. Maybe Will was a bit of a knuckle dragger and didn't like going to school. However, I do personally kind of highly doubt that. I do think he would have enjoyed that process. That's just my opinion, though. There's no facts on that. So, full stop. And then we got another full stop. So we've had 3 full stops so far. So there's moments where JACQUES stops and thinks about how to articulate the next thing. Just like we do when we do stop talking, we pause, and I'm trying to think of the words that I need to say now to be able to articulate what it is that I'm trying to tell you. So although some of those might have been commas, if I were to write it down, these full stops are deeper and richer than a comma. It's literally, when you make a full stop, one solid thing. A comma is just a dash. It's quicker to literally pen. Have a little practice, like write down a full stop and another one, then a comma. The interaction that your pen has with the page differs, right? One requires more anchoring of the ink. The other is a simple dash. So again, make sure you honor them accordingly. It's very, 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 very important. Doing all sorts of lovely voices and sounds today for you. Good Lord. On to the third then. And then the lover, sighing like furnace. Love that bit. So now he's moved on to, the young lover. Sighing like furnace. We did Romeo last week. If you missed it, do check it out. But I'm thinking of Romeo now. He enters Romeo and Juliet, the play. The whole play opens obviously with the prologue, but then Romeo arrives. Oh, Rosalind, I need Rosalind. And in this play as well, we see Rosalind and Orlando just longing for each other and pining and all these like giddy emotions. And I think sighing like furnace is a really nice simile there. And a furnace, look it up, I'm not going to do it for you today, with a woeful ballad made to his mistress Eyebrow. And of course that is a nod. I don't think it's quite happened yet, but Orlando is, oh no, it definitely hasn't happened yet. He's writing poetry for Rosalind. There's a lot of truth to be said that will be played out in the play of As You Like It, to what JACQUES is saying. And in fact, there is, not to spoiler alert it for you, but there is a bit of everything in this play. So including the 7th act. It's really, really good. It's really, really good. So and then the lover, sighing like furnace, with a woeful ballad made to his mistress Eyebrow. It's such a good line. Sighing like furnace, with a woeful ballad. Even when you're in love, it can feel like turmoil and stress and pain and anguish and all of these things, right? So he's saying it's a woeful ballad. It's not a joyful ballad. When you're in love, it's the worst thing ever, because when you can't have that love. And we see that enacted throughout the play. And a woeful ballad made to his mistress Eyebrow. Made to his mistress Eyebrow. It's really good. In fact, let's just quickly look up eyebrow. We all know what an eyebrow is. However, strip of hair growing on the ridge above a person's eye socket. It's kind of a funny thing to write about, but I think it is a kind of nod to the silliness of love. Like we go, wow, I love the way their nose twitches when they smile, and I love the way that they look down and put their hands, all these silly little details. Traditionally, from Shakespeare's sonnets at least, he'll talk about hands and lips, and smells and roses and blonde hair and pale skin. And yet Jaques chooses to make a woeful ballad made to his mistress Eyebrow. It's kind of funny, I think. And so this is what I mean as well. I think he does start quite lighthearted and there are some jokes in there. It's a funny thing, isn't it? I'm just thinking about my boyfriend. I'll be like, wow, I love the way his eyebrow just sits on his head. It's a bit silly, right? So yeah, it's I think a nice joke in there, personally. But maybe it is a real thing. Maybe eyebrows were all the rage back then. I don't know. Then we got a full stop there. Then a soldier. So I think there's a nice bit of drama there. When we think of soldiers, what do you think of? And I think that would actually be quite similar to what they think of back in those days. If you're a soldier, you were trained, you had to face death, you were a military man. Soldiers were men back in those days. Occasionally, there might have been the odd female one. But it's a bit more serious, I think, and thus begins the serious side, more so of this speech, perhaps. Then a soldier. And again, it's then a soldier, not then perhaps a soldier. Or, you know, he's being very direct and very clear in his images. Then a soldier. And dum, da, dum, dum. It kind of, for me, that rhythm works with it. Then a soldier, full of strange oaths and bearded like the pard. Pard, what's a pard? Jealous in honour, sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation even in the cannon's mouth. So this one's a little bit more poetic, I would say, a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? A little bit more detailed, perhaps. And the way it's written with the consonants full of strange oaths. The vowel sounds there, full of strange oaths. And bearded like the pard. Let's just have a little quick look. I just want to look up strange as well. We know what strange, if something is strange, it is abnormal. But let's just go into more depth, because I do think as well, back in Shakespeare's time, strange did mean slightly different things. So unusual or surprising, difficult to understand or explain, not previously visited, seen or encountered, unfamiliar or alien. Not previously visited. Oh, I just said that one. And in physics, interesting, denoting or involving a flavour variety of unstable quark having an electric charge of... Okay, I'm not so sure that was relevant back in Shakespeare's day, but still. It does come from the Latin extraneous, which is external, strange. And I think as a soldier as well, that you would have faced a lot of terrible situations and had to kill people, especially back in those days. Life and death were much more tangible than we are today. If someone dies today, they're normally in a hospital or somewhere away from normal life. But I can imagine back in those days, you know, you'd have woken up, someone would have, you know, died in bed, and, you know, someone would have passed out on the street and people's bodies would have been left around. There's a traditional image of, well, I've got it in my head anyway. I believe there was actually people that would walk around the streets with a cart, picking up dead bodies and putting them on a cart and walking them through the streets to go be buried. Like, so that's what I mean when death was a lot more tangible back in those days. And as a soldier, it wouldn't have been sitting in an office looking at drones and flying planes. It would have been to fight and enact political change through violence, usually. So full of strange oaths. An oath is a very, you know, if you make an oath, it's in fact, what's the religious thing there? Traditionally as well. When I think of oaths, I think of marriage. That's the most serious oath I think there is, but there's plenty more. A solemn promise, often invoking a divine witness. So oath does have that kind of divinity connection to God. The idea, if you make an oath, you're doing it with under the eyes of the Lord or whatnot. So interesting. Strange oaths. I wonder why they're strange. Let's not talk about that anymore, but have a think. Why does he say full of strange oaths? Full of odd promises. not just, he's made one odd promise, he's full of odd promises. Isn't that an unusual thing to say? Why is that? Really dig in and know why you're bringing that one up. Shakespeare is so specific. He never gives you the same thing twice. So make sure you really know why you, as the actor, have decided to bring that up. Sorry, you as the actor, as the character, has decided to bring that up at that point. And bearded like the pard. Let's look at pard. What does that mean? I don't know. Ooh. Pard is the Greek word for the leopard, which is listed in this is Wikipedia, forgive me, which is listed in medieval bestiaries and in the Pliny the Elder's book Natural History. Over the years, there have been many different depictions of the creature, including some adaptation with and without manes. And there's a picture that's definitely medieval, and he's got like this kind of almost like tassel neck piece around the top half of his body. Looks awful, actually. Almost demonic, actually, the pictures. Have a little look up. Brilliant thing about Google, you can find these images. And sometimes with shorter tails. So a leopard, in terms of the dictionary, it literally just says a leopard. The spotted skin of the pard. So interesting. So why does he bring that up? And bearded like the pard. Bearded like the leopard. And I think if you're bearded, I mean, it could just be like a literal thing. Once you pass teenage years, you start to grow a beard. Testosterone happens and you develop facial hair. But leopards as well are cunning, they're quick. And then he does go on to say sudden and quick in quarrel. So that all fits for me in describing a young man and a soldier. So he's full of strange oaths and bearded like the pard, jealous in honour. And again, that's a funny way to describe honour. He's kind of, I think, highlighting the flaws and the heated reactionary behaviour of a young soldier. Jealous in honour. So he's jealous of people that are honourable, perhaps. That's how I take that. Sudden and quick in quarrel. Quick to start a fight. Quarrel, do look it up. We know what it means, kind of, because I've just translated it, but get more specific. Know exactly what quarrel means. It's an argument. Seeking the bubble reputation. What? Even in the cannon's mouth. Okay. What does that mean? So canon is spelt with 3 N's in total. So I'm going to quickly look up canon. So brilliant. And let me just quickly... so I actually thought it was the other way around. So I thought a cannon, as in the gun, the big cannons that, you've seen in all these old history films, you know what I mean, was spelt C-A-N-O-N, and that was what the giant guns were called. But actually it's the other way around. So a cannon with 3 N's overall is the gun, the giant gun, and a canon with 1 N is actually a general law, rule, or principle by which something is judged, and also a collection or list of sacred books. That's what I was thinking, the canon of, the biblical canon, for example. But interesting. So canon, he is talking about the gun, but of course there are 2 different versions. And when I say canon, you're going to think what you're going to think, but there are other meanings there. So again, Shakespeare always gives us words that do have alternative meanings and all of that jazz. So even in the canon, seeking the bubble reputation, even in the cannon's mouth. So let's look up bubble. And remember back in those days, bubbles, would they have been as, seen? I'm thinking about beer and water and the liquid they would have seen back in those days. They wouldn't have had bubble baths quite like we did, although they would have had some sort of cleaning product, but would it have foamed? I don't know, all these interesting things. So it says here, a thin sphere of liquid enclosing air or other gas, used to refer to a good or fortunate situation that is isolated from reality or unlikely to last. Of course, I remember people used to say about drama school, it's like being in your own little bubble because you're just in this cocoon and you're just, everything that matters is in that world, that theatre. You could say the theatre is a bubble. The globe itself is a spherical building. Interesting. And rising from gas or air. So it also says similar words are illusion, delusion, fantasy, dream, daydream. And let's just go back as well. Oh gosh, there's even more. I want to see where the original... So from origin, it's an English word, burble, bubble. Let's look up burble then, if that's where it stems, if that's where it stems from. So burble, like make a continuous murmuring noise, murmur, tinkle, whir. Middle English, in the sense to bubble, is imitative. Murmurer. Okay, so that's interesting. Seeking the bubble reputation, the murmured reputation, even in the cannon's mouth. And the cannon's mouth is that opening, the closing, right? It's interesting he's called it, that's where you'd pop in the pellet, I was about to say. The cannonball, there we go, that's what it would have been. So this is really interesting. So I think you got to think on that, right? So sudden and quick and quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation. So the soldier is looking for the something reputation, even in the cannon's mouth. So, and looking up burble, which is what bubble is originated from, it does talk about a continuous murmuring noise, or even here actually says it's rambling speech, an hour of boring burble. So actually this is quite important and really much bigger than I initially thought. In the forest, like I said, there are no traditional rules of society in the forest of Arden. That's where all the outcasts go. It's all where the lower statuses go, the lower working class, the shepherds, the shepherdesses. Duke Senior was a duke, but he has been extradited and has to leave and live in the forest now as an outcast from society. So the people in the forest are making do. There are no ranks. There is no court. There is no way of doing things. And I'm just thinking back to, in fact, was it Romeo? There's so many references to it. But in A Winter's Tale as well, looking at Hermione, she's literally in a court, but she's surrounded by all the courtiers and the people that she would, have relations with. There was like a structure to society, much like today. You've got government, you've got the royals, you've got all this sort of stuff. But in the forest, none of that exists. Duke Senior is not a duke anymore. That's been stripped of him. Celia and Rosalind are not what they once were. Rosalind has become Ganymede. Celia hasn't she changed her name or something? She said, I'll besmirch my face and something or other. They change who they are to fit in with the fact that there is no fitting in the forest, if that makes sense. So actually, what I think is really important here is JACQUES' opinion of reputation. Seeking the bubble, the murmured, the rambling reputation, the prate, excellent. It says here, speak continuously and at length in an unintelligible or confused way. Much like, I'm going to get political here, for me, the government, they're just spouting rubbish a lot of the time. Politicians, they say things. I watched a brilliant video yesterday. I can't remember who it was. The brilliant chap who's in charge of the railway strike at the moment, speaking with a Tory on a show, like a debate show, and what the Tory woman saying, it's really clear. It's not clear. It's all fluff and bullshit. You know what I mean? And he's trying to say, well, no, but that doesn't say what you're saying it says. So funny. Look it up. It's brilliant. But I think that's what JACQUES is saying here. The bubble reputation, even in the cannon's mouth. And again, reputation is spoken. Honor is spoken. So I think he's using the analogy of a mouth speaking, bubble, murmuring reputation. He's looking for that in the wrong place, or in the cannon's mouth. Being a soldier will give you a reputation. It will create you honor. And I think JACQUES doesn't believe in any and all of that. Who's to say that person should be king or queen when, it's all just talk. It's all just bleh. It's all just BS. If you've got any questions about that, just let me know. But that's a massive mindset shift for me on this section. I think JACQUES gets personal here and has his own agenda to come through. It's not just a lighthearted joke about a kid not wanting to go to school anymore. He's talking about the flaw of society and the idea that reputation, it's something that just travels and whispers, and there's so much drama and gossip that can tarnish someone's reputation so fast. I'm thinking of, in a modern context, I'm thinking of like The Sun and the Daily Mail, like all these kind of gossiping newspapers that love to speculate and tarnish people as much as they can. Like what? It's all just nothing. I don't know. I'm finding that really, really interesting. Sudden and quick in quarrels, seeking the bubble reputation even in the cannon's mouth. And then the justice, in fair round belly with good capon lined. So straight away, I bet there's a word there that we're all thinking, what does that mean? Capon. What? Capon. Capon. Who knows? Let's see. Oh, okay. Well, I'm vegetarian, but it's come up with images of chicken. It says a castrated domestic... Oh, okay. It says a castrated domestic cock fattened for eating. Ugh. But interesting. So, and then the justice. And actually, this is so relevant, actually. I'm thinking about this. The idea, he's describing the justice in fair round belly, a bit like Falstaff. Another Shakespeare reference there, but, a big justice. These old white men that sit on their chairs and consume and are gluttonous, and they sit there and they decide what happens with the world. Yes. Can we think of someone in British society who maybe resembles justice at the moment? And indeed, the justices of the Supreme Court, speaking to my overseas friends, like, justice has been absolutely at the moment. And I think, this is a lovely image for me right now. I'm enjoying it. He's comparing justice to a good capon-lined, domestic, castrated cock. What is he saying there? He's got no balls, he's been fattened up, and a cock traditionally is obviously like a bird, but in modern context, if we call someone a cock, it's not really a nice thing, is it? Oh, you're a dick. I do use a plethora of vocabulary on these calls, as Shakespeare does, so it's not a call, is it? You know what I mean? On this live, so forgive me if I offend, but we're here to discuss linguistics and vocabulary and Shakespeare's way of using it and comparing it to a modern context to help it be understood by everyone now as well. And this is how I would approach it. So really, really good. With eyes severe and beard of formal cut. So a beard cut formally. He's got, the most fashionable, formal, smart way of having his beard trimmed. And eyes severe. I think that's such a good image as well. What does that mean to you? Do you have flashbacks of your dad telling you off when you did something wrong and his eyes looking very severe? Or, what does eyes severe look like to you in your mind's eye? It'll be different for everyone, surely. Again, he's getting a bit more detailed with this one. So we've got eyes severe, round belly, good capon lined. If something is lined, it is like, surrounding something. But again, look that up if you're not sure. And beard of formal cut, full of wise saws. When I think of saws, I think of a saw like what my dad used to use to cut wood. That's personal to me. That brings up a very specific memory of being in my dad's shed and sawing wood for no reason, just because it was a task to do. But it does say here, so obviously a hand tool for cutting wood. It also says, make or form something using a saw, cut with a saw, make rapid to and fro motions in cutting something or in playing a stringed instrument. Also says here we go, a proverb or a maxim. It is worth bearing in mind another old saw. Oppositions do not win elections, governments lose them. So that's the example it has in the dictionary there. So it comes from the Old English sagu, a saying or a speech. So he's saying here, full of wise saws. Again, full. The soldier was full of strange oaths, and now we're here as the justice full of wise saws. So interesting, isn't it? I think that helps me actually make sense of the soldier a little bit more. The idea that the soldier is full of promises, weird and wonderful promises. And you do, when you're younger, you promise I'll love you forever. You promise that you'll never let that person down and you'll be friends forever. But actually, as you get older, you're full of wise saws. You're full of sayings that you've been taught. You're full of all these wise words. You make less promises. It's interesting, isn't it? And modern instances. What does that mean? Let's look up instances. And because of time, I have got a call very shortly that I need to prepare for. We're going to leave it there and we're going to come back to the rest of this speech next week. Isn't it good? Do you see how meaty it is and how much more detailed is in there? What starts out as a kind of soft commentary can have all this depth and unspoken memory and feelings and thoughts and emotions behind it. And it's really important to do that depth of work with any text, not just classical. And then you can decide whether or not to include it. Whether or not, maybe he does have a memory of that, or maybe no, he has just plucked that out of the brain. You've got more choices and more scope to play with the words that you've been given and create your character. So just quickly, modern instances. So yeah, an example or single occurrence of something. Cite as an example. So it says here, I instanced Bob as someone whose commitment had certainly got things done. Mention, quote, cite. So he's kind of, I think, again, making a mockery there that justice just cites things. They spew things, similar to the bubble reputation comment. It's all just talk and full of wise saws and modern instances, just full of common sayings and citing the obvious. That's what that means to me. And so he plays his part. And then we've got the sixth age shifts. He doesn't jump straight in with a character and a stereotype or a immediate image invoking thing. For example, a schoolboy, we all think of something. A soldier, we think of something. An infant, we all think of something. We know we can anchor immediately onto those images in our mind's eye, but something changes here. He says the sixth age shifts, and we'll start from there next week. Let me read it one more time quickly for you up until that point. In fact, no, I'll read the whole thing. It's not too much more, is it? And then we'll just finish it off next week and go into a little bit more depth with it. Hope you've enjoyed that. Do like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And comment below if you've got any thoughts or feelings. And do share this as well with anyone who might benefit from it. Or if you, just want to share it with someone who might enjoy it. That's great. Sharing is caring. And if you want to share it with someone you don't like, just go for it. All the world's a stage. I'm going to start again. Okay, so all the world's a stage. So he just said, we're not. Thou seest we are not all alone unhappy. This wide and universal theatre presents more woeful pageants than the scene wherein we play in. All the world's a stage. And all the men and women, merely players. They have their exits and their entrances. And one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. At first, the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms. Then the whining schoolboy, with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like snail unwillingly to school. And then the lover, sighing like furnace, with a woeful ballad made to his mistress Eyebrow. Then a soldier, full of strange oaths, and bearded like the pard, jealous in honour, sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation even in the cannon's mouth. And then the justice, in fair round belly, with good capon lined, with eyes severe, and beard of formal cut, full of wise saws and modern instances. And so he plays his part. The sixth age shifts into the lean and slippered pantaloon, with spectacles on nose and pouch on side, his youthful hose well saved, a world too wide for his shrunk shank, and his big manly voice turning again toward childish treble, pipes and whistles in his sound. Last scene of all that ends this strange, eventful history is second childishness and mere oblivion. Sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. Interesting, I had a bit more of a light-hearted approach towards the end there. Not sure it necessarily calls for that, but maybe JACQUES thinks he is telling everyone a really brilliant thing. That could be a really lovely touch to add into that. It's great, but we're going to end up in mere oblivion, everyone. It's going to be brilliant. We're not going to taste or see or have teeth or anything. It's going to be great. And there's no discussion of this speech afterwards. We go straight on with the action. But we'll come to that next week. Looking forward to seeing you for part 2. Thank you so much for joining, as always. And have a lovely rest of your day. Bye for now. I love that speech.